beneath the Atlantic Ocean, a new look at the legendary Titanic. These fresh images exposing an altered landscape 2.5 miles underwater.
Deep beneath the ocean's surface, something was moving slow, mechanical, and headed for one of the most eerie locations on the planet. Even the experts were shaken by what they saw.
Titanic's face is forever changed.
This dive revealed sights that were never intended to be seen, including human remains that may have been preserved for more than a century, and mysterious objects that no one can explain. Unsettling noises, twisted metal, and something lurking in the wreck's shadows aren't merely hearsay. They were captured on video. We're counting down 20 horrifying findings from the Titanic wreckage that were discovered by an underwater drone in this video, and you will never forget what they witnessed. RMS Titanic and the wreckage. The RMS Titanic, the biggest and most opulent passenger ship ever constructed, was making her inaugural journey from Southampton to New York City on the evening of April 14 in 1912. The ship carried over 2,200 passengers and crew, including some of the world's wealthiest individuals, and was deemed unsinkable because of its sophisticated engineering and watertight compartments. However, catastrophe struck as it navigated the icy North Atlantic. In less than 3 hours, the Titanic sank after colliding with an iceberg that tore through its hull. One of the deadliest maritime disasters in peacetime claimed the lives of over 1,500 people. The wreck's precise location beneath the ocean was unknown for decades. The remains of the Titanic, located some 12,500 feet below the surface, were not found until September 1st, 1995, by a combined American-French expedition. It was found in the North Atlantic Ocean, approximately 600 kilometers southeast of Newfoundland, Canada. Only a few expeditions have since made the trip, employing remotely operated vehicles to film the deteriorating ship and the personal belongings left behind. These missions have helped piece together the last moments of the Titanic's journey and have produced eerie images of the ship's final resting place, complete with the items and remains that still leave the rest of the world scared. Nurius X expedition. But the way the world finally witnessed the detailed wreckage in 2025 sent chills down the spine. An ambitious deep-sea expedition known as the Nurius X mission was started in early 2025 with the sole objective of performing the most thorough and non-invasive survey of the Titanic wreck ever attempted. OceanGate Marine Research, in partnership with international oceanographic institutes and engineering labs, led the mission, which was named after the Greek sea god Nurius. The Nurius X, a cutting-edge underwater drone made especially for deep waters, was at the center of the mission. The drone, which was designed to endure pressures exceeding 6,000 pounds per square inch, had a hybrid navigation system that relayed ultra-high-definition video back to the surface via fiber optic tethering, real-time sonar mapping, and artificial intelligence. This system could also avoid obstacles as delicate as hummingbird. Multispectral cameras, robotic arms for precise scanning, and non-contact 3D imaging tools allowed the Nurius X to capture fine details of rusting metal, decaying wood, and buried artifacts without disturbing the wreck. The drone investigated both known and unexplored areas of the Titanic site during several dives that lasted up to 10 hours each. Researchers were astounded by what they discovered. Crumbling walls in the lower decks, elaborate railings buried in silt, and even pieces of glassware and leather shoes that were remarkably well preserved, despite the frigid, oxygen-poor conditions. Eerie and strange tragedy. The silence grew more oppressive as the mission progressed. It was eerily still, as if time itself had been drowned, in contrast to normal underwater dives. During the mission, The drone's operators reported feeling a strange psychological weight, a profound sense of loss, and life being interrupted. According to one crew member, it was like walking through a cathedral built of tragedy, with each item whispering a tale of quiet surrender, heartbreak, or panic. The remains of the Titanic serve as an underwater mausoleum in addition to being a historical relic. Additionally, the world was once again forced to face the enormous human cost concealed beneath 2.5 miles of darkness through the lens of the Nurius X. What the drone has captured? What Nurius X has captured is not for the faint of heart.
Among 7 LAC images taken,
the most remarkable finds were personal belongings that had been exceptionally preserved in the frigid depths, including torn linen, shattered porcelain, and even an alligator skin handbag belonging to a first-class passenger. The drone also documented pieces of fine china lying intact among the debris, chandeliers still hanging in the first-class smoking room, and the statue of Diana, a prominent artistic centerpiece that once graced the grand staircase. One of the more chilling discoveries was a delicate gold necklace, still looped around what appeared to be the remains of a garment sleeve, found near a collapsed corridor on the starboard side. Nearby, the camera revealed the head of a porcelain doll, its wide eyes half buried in sand, evoking the haunting presence of the children aboard the doomed ship. Even more sobering were what scientists believe to be skeletal remains, partially covered in cloth and marine growth, arranged in a pose suggesting the individual had been sitting or kneeling as the vessel sank. Most harrowing was a pocket watch in the hand of a skeleton with cracked glass, its hands still frozen at the precise moment the Titanic broke apart, gripped in the remnants of a hand. Scattered throughout the debris field were coins from various nations, still legible despite a century underwater, while in one compartment, a metal bed frame remained bolted to the floor beside a rusted mirror that dimly reflected the drone's light. Each of these preserved items offering a deeply human and haunting connection to the past. A letter written by Esther Hart and her daughter Eva, reflecting their personal stories. How was the Titanic constructed? Before we talk about how Titanic sank, it is important to know how this marvel was constructed back in times when technology was not that much advanced. So, let's examine the engineering that went into creating this maritime wonder. The world was rushing headlong into modernity when the Titanic was built in 1909, at the beginning of the 20th century. The ship, which took more than 2 years to build and involved more than 15,000 workers, was constructed by the Harland and Wolff shipyard in Belfast, Ireland. A double-bottom hull, 16 watertight compartments with remotely closable doors, and 4 enormous funnels, 3 functional, 1 added for aesthetic balance, were among the newest design innovations of its era. It was the biggest ship on the water, measuring 883 feet in length and more than 46,000 tons in weight. A luxurious floating ship. The RMS Titanic was a floating palace of luxury. In addition to being a feat of engineering, its enormous compartments contained rooms that could compete with the most opulent hotels of the time. First-class passengers enjoyed opulent dining saloons, a grand staircase, and elaborate lounges with a variety of styles. The ship's Turkish bath, which included a steam room, electric bath, and cooling room, a rare amenity even in upscale hotels at the time, was one of its most distinctive features. Additionally, travelers had access to a fully furnished gym where they could operate early models of bicycles, rowing machines, and even an electric horse. There was a barber shop, a squash court, and a swimming pool. The Titanic provided smoking rooms, reading and writing areas, and orchestral music performances for passengers' amusement and leisure. Although third class was modest, it was cleaner and more comfortable than the majority of immigrant accommodations at the time. and even second-class passengers had access to private cabins and well-furnished common areas. Every floor of the ship was a separate universe that represented the societal divisions of the time, as well as a common faith in the comfort and assurance of contemporary travel. Did comfort come at the cost of safety? Although the Titanic was a floating palace, there were concerning mistakes hidden beneath its beauty. It only had 20 lifeboats, which is less than what is now required by law, and barely enough for half of the people on board. Ships in the area, such as the S. Californian, issued warnings about the dangerous ice ahead on April 14. However, Captain Edward Smith continued at almost full speed. Frederick Fleet, the lookout, saw the iceberg at 11:40 p.m. and sounded the alarm. The ship tried to turn, but it sideswiped the ice, leaving its starboard side with several gashes. The ship's 6 watertight compartments flooded for it to remain afloat. The Titanic's fate was decided the instant that iceberg struck, even though it took almost 3 hours for it to sink. How did the Titanic actually sink? And why did so many lives vanish with it? Here comes the part that is remembered by everyone in history. According to contemporary science, the iceberg caused several tiny punctures in the ship's hull instead of a single massive gash. The structure may have been weakened if low-quality rivets with a high slag content had fractured under the impact. The ship's stern rose as water filled the front compartments, putting tremendous strain on the center. At 2:20 a.m. on April 15, the Titanic finally sank and vanished beneath the ocean. Tragically, few lifeboats were available, mostly for women and children. Only 20% of men survived, compared to roughly 70% of women and children. Tales of loss and courage surfaced, such as Ida Strauss's decision to remain by her husband's side instead of going on a lifeboat by herself. Or John Jacob Astor IV, who reportedly didn't take the threat seriously and never made it out. All survivors were eventually rescued by the RMS Carpathia, which arrived around 4 a.m. When was the wreck discovered, and what have we learned since? The Titanic remained lost beneath the Atlantic for over 70 years. On September 1, 1985, a joint mission by American and French researchers, led by Robert Ballard and Jean-Louis Michel, finally located the wreck using sonar and remotely operated vehicles. Ironically, the team's original goal was to find sunken U.S. Navy submarines, but they ended early and spent the time they had left pursuing Ballard's dream. The broken remains of the Titanic, located 12,500 feet below the surface, were reached by the debris trail. We now have the most accurate picture of the ship's condition thanks to the first full-scale digital scan of the entire wreck site. The unsinkable to deadliest disaster. Despite the freezing temperatures, a few passengers survived the night by finding room in the few available lifeboats. Others were cast into the frigid Atlantic, where the water was about -2 degrees Celsius, which is frigid enough to induce hypothermia in a matter of minutes. While waiting for help, many of them quickly drowned or died from the cold. Others were still stuck inside the sinking ship, unable to get out of locked compartments and rising water. Others might have slowly perished in complete darkness, while others were probably crushed as the ship shattered. The tragedy of each death was compounded by the possibility that hundreds of lives could have been saved with additional lifeboats and better planning. Survivors later described the chaos, the screams fading into silence, and the haunting realization that the unsinkable ship had become one of history's deadliest maritime disasters. The survivors of the Titanic. The survivors of the Titanic did not return to New York as mere passengers who had escaped a sinking ship. When they stepped onto the docks beneath the bright lights of the city, they carried more than just the weight of survival. They carried memories, last talks, last looks, the cries in the dark, that the sea had attempted to engulf. The voices of those who perished in the frigid Atlantic were carried by them. They also had an obligation to speak for those who were unable to do so, whether they wanted to or not. The truth, which the ocean had attempted to bury 2.5 miles below, was what the world looked to them for, not just answers. The Titanic endured in their tales as a reminder of human error, human bravery, and the price of forgetting either, in addition to being a shipwreck. Still a revered ruin. Humanity encounters awe in addition to twisted steel and silent passageways when it ventures far beneath the ocean to see the Titanic wreckage. Once a representation of luxury and human achievement, the ship now lies broken at the bottom of the Atlantic. Nevertheless, it is revered even in ruin. Even though that terrible night was over a century ago, the Titanic still lingers in our collective consciousness. Its narrative explores human ambition, vulnerability, and the price of arrogance in addition to a ship that went down. As explorers send cameras into its hollow halls and see the ghostly remains, they are reminded that no matter how advanced we become, the sea holds a silence that speaks louder than words, and the Titanic remains its most haunting monument. Titanic was not merely a ship. The Titanic was more than just a ship. It was a representation of modern engineering, ambition, and wealth. It was lavishly furnished with fine china, marble interiors, custom furniture, and royal-quality artwork, and its construction cost more than $200 million today. However, the magnitude of the loss is what really leaves the Titanic in the public consciousness, not just its majesty or its terrible demise. Together, the ship, the supplies, and most significantly, the lives, produced one of the most extensively recorded historical events. The details have been preserved for decades by writers, researchers, and historians. Conspiracy theories. However, the Titanic continues to be a subject of conjecture in spite of the abundance of evidence and the testimonies of survivors. Numerous conspiracy theories have surfaced over time, some from independent researchers and others from reporters. These theories present audacious assertions and alternative explanations that, despite their controversy, continue to pique interest and spark debate. The Olympic switch theory. The Olympic switch theory is one of the most discussed conspiracy theories pertaining to the Titanic. According to this theory, the ship that actually went down on April 15, 1912, was the RMS Olympic, the Titanic's nearly identical sister ship. Proponents of the theory claim that the Olympic was secretly switched with the Titanic in a massive insurance fraud scheme by the White Star Line after it had been damaged in a collision months earlier. Proponents assert that the Titanic was purposefully sunk in order to obtain insurance money because the ship's designs were so similar that a switch might have gone unnoticed. Historians and maritime specialists, however, have largely rejected this theory. The wreck is unquestionably the Titanic, thanks to thorough construction records, survivor testimonies, and physical distinctions between the two ships, such as window placements and interior layouts. The Olympic switch theory is intriguing, but it hasn't been validated and is only speculative. The Curse of the Mummy. And then there's the spooky story of the Curse of the Mummy. According to this legend, the Titanic was carrying an ancient Egyptian artifact, which is sometimes described as the lid of a priestess's coffin or a piece of a cursed mummy. According to the story, the artifact's presence on the ship doomed the journey from the beginning and brought bad luck to everyone who came into contact with it. Some versions claim it was in the personal cargo of a wealthy collector, while others say it was being shipped to a museum in New York. There is no historical proof that any Egyptian mummy or related artifact was ever mentioned on the Titanic's cargo manifest, despite the fact that this terrifying story gives the story a dramatic edge. The majority of historians concur that the curse was a myth that proliferated in newspapers and rumors following the catastrophe, most likely due to the public's interest in Egyptology and the unknown. Nevertheless, the legend endures, serving as a reminder that tragedy frequently invites myth and mystery. The Illuminati theory. The idea that the Titanic disaster was planned by the Illuminati, a covert organization frequently associated with worldwide power and control in conspiracy circles, is arguably the most terrifying and contentious theory of all. According to this theory, the Titanic's sinking was not an accident, but rather a planned action intended to destroy influential people who opposed the Federal Reserve Bank's establishment the following year, in 1913. Rich businessmen who opposed centralized banking, such as Isidor Straus, Benjamin Guggenheim, and John Jacob Astor IV, were among the passengers who perished. This theory's proponents contend that their passing opportunely paved the way for economic reforms in the U.S. Nevertheless, there is no historical proof that the Illuminati or any intentional conspiracy were involved in the Titanic disaster. This theory is strongly rejected by most historians as being unsupported and speculative. However, its tenacity is a reflection of the Titanic's enduring allure and mystery. How people feel about the Titanic. The tale of the Titanic continues to evoke strong emotions in us over a century later. Not only was it the biggest ship in the world, but it also represented human pride, ingenuity, and ambition. Furthermore, it left behind more than just twisted metal on the ocean floor after sinking. It left behind tales, unresolved issues, and a reminder of how fleeting life can be. Every shoe in the sand, every silent chandelier, and every personal belonging submerged under 2.5 miles of water all demonstrate that this was a human tragedy as much as an engineering one. The images are unforgettable, the facts are well documented, and even the conspiracy theories, albeit unsubstantiated, demonstrate how powerfully this story continues to captivate people's attention. The Titanic is no longer just a shipwreck. It is a reflection of our true selves, bright, flawed, hopeful, and haunted. And the Titanic will never be fully forgotten as long as we keep looking back, exploring, and asking questions. Hope you have enjoyed this journey of Titanic. Subscribe us to get more interesting information about the world. Thanks for watching.